Imagine a land of endless promise, where dreams of freedom and prosperity beckoned brave souls to carve out a new life. The Homestead Act of 1862 dangled the tantalizing offer of 160 acres to anyone bold enough to tame it, luring hundreds of thousands into the wild heart of America's frontier, chasing visions of a lush, fertile paradise. But the reality they found was a brutal awakening. The Great Plains were called the Great American Desert for a reason. It was an endless, treeless sea of grass where traditional building materials like wood and stone were almost non-existent. This was a world of violent extremes, savage blizzards, raging prairie fires, and droughts more intense than the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Trapped in this harsh landscape with no wood to build a proper home, settlers were forced to innovate or die. Their solution was an act of pure desperation, a house built from the very earth beneath their feet. The sod house, known as a soddy, was not a charming cabin. It was a grim, flawed, and often hellish shelter against a world that seemed determined to break them. Today, we're uncovering the true story of how settlers actually built and survived in these houses of dirt. If you enjoy learning the real, unvarnished history of the American West, take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Part 1. Harvesting Nebraska Marble. The raw material for these prairie homes was the sod itself, a substance the settlers grimly joked was Nebraska marble. This wasn't the soft turf of a modern lawn. Prairie sod was a nearly indestructible mat of densely tangled roots from grasses like bluestem and buffalo grass, tough enough to survive the region's constant droughts and fires. It was a nightmare to work with. The very term sodbuster came from the grueling ordeal of trying to plow this land for farming. Before John Deere perfected a steel plow strong enough for the job, some pioneers had to use axes just to chop holes in the sod to plant seeds. Harvesting this same material for a house was just as brutal. It required a special breaking plow designed to slice the sod into long, uniform ribbons, 12 to 18 inches wide and about 4 inches thick. A team of oxen would drag the plow, cutting the strips, which then had to be chopped by hand with a spade or an axe, into rectangular bricks, usually 2 or 3 feet long. The labor was immense. A single small sod house required about an acre of prairie to be plowed and cut up. Each one of those sod bricks could weigh up to 50 pounds, and they had to be laid the same day they were cut, or they would dry out in the sun and turn to useless dust. One Swedish immigrant named Ralph Johnson wrote about the experience in his diary. Building sod houses, especially when the wind blows, is not quite as pleasant as being out buggy riding with a girl. One's nose, eyes, mouth, ears, and hair gets full of loose dirt. The name Nebraska marble captured the cruel irony of their existence. The very toughness of the sod that made it a farmer's greatest obstacle was the exact same quality that made it a viable, if miserable, in building material. They were literally building their homes from their greatest enemy. Part 2. Raising walls of living dirt. Constructing a soddy was a unique kind of masonry, combining brute strength with a few clever tricks needed for working with a living, unstable material. It began with no foundation. The builder simply cleared and leveled a patch of ground, tamping the earth down until it was almost as hard as concrete. This packed dirt was the floor. A wooden floor was a luxury few could even imagine. Then the walls went up, layer by heavy layer. There was one critical technique that everyone followed: lay the sod bricks grass side down. This was ingenious. The tough prairie grass roots, which were still alive, would then grow upward into the brick on top of them. Over time, this would knit the individual blocks together, turning the wall into a single, solid, semi-living unit. They used traditional masonry principles, staggering the joints on each layer to avoid creating weak seams. And because the walls were massive, often 2 to 3 feet thick, they would lay every third or fourth layer of bricks crosswise, locking the inner and outer sections of the wall together to keep them from separating. Putting in doors and windows was a race against gravity. Windows were one of the most expensive parts of a soddy, and the glass had to be protected from the crushing weight of the walls. As the walls were built up, wooden frames were set in place. The key was something called the settling gap. Builders would intentionally leave a space of a few inches above the window and door frames, loosely stuffing it with grass or rags. Over the next few months, the immense weight of the sod would cause the walls to compress and settle downward. That gap provided a buffer, allowing the wall to settle without putting its crushing force directly onto the wooden frame and shattering the precious glass. Part 3. The Ceiling of Misery. If the walls of a soddy were a testament to the settlers' ingenuity, the roof was a monument to their misery. It was, without a doubt, the most dangerous and poorly performing part of the house. The most common design was primitive. A central ridge pole was laid across two forked posts with smaller poles acting as rafters. This frame was covered with a layer of brush and thick prairie hay, and then the whole thing was topped off with a final layer of sod bricks. This design was a complete and total failure. The sod roof was famously, unavoidably leaky. When it rained, water would slowly seep through the layers of dirt and grass, dripping for days on end. The situation was so common that one homesteader famously said, "It rained 2 days longer inside than it did outside." The constant dripping turned the packed earth floor into a muddy swamp. Women often had to cook with an umbrella held over the stove just to keep clumps of mud from falling into the family's dinner. Even when it was dry, the roof was a menace. Dirt, debris, and grass would constantly crumble from the ceiling, contaminating food, bedding, and every surface in the home. To fight back against the endless filth, settlers would tack sheets of muslin or canvas to the rafters to create a crude false ceiling. This cloth would catch the worst of the falling dirt, along with the occasional mouse, bug, or snake that had made a home in the earthen roof. The greatest danger, however, was collapse. After a heavy rain, the sod roof would absorb a massive amount of water, increasing its weight exponentially. This incredible load could easily snap the wooden supports, sending tons of wet earth crashing down on the family below. It was an ever-present and lethal threat. Part 4. The Battle. Within. While the soddy offered some protection from the blizzards and fires of the prairie, the inside became a battleground for a different kind of survival. The house was a shared and often hostile ecosystem. The living walls and earthen roof were a perfect home for a menagerie of unwanted guests. Settlers fought a constant war against rodents, fleas, and bedbugs that burrowed into their homes. But the most terrifying cohabitants were the snakes. First-hand accounts are filled with horrifying stories of rattlesnakes emerging from dens inside the thick walls, and tales of snakes dropping from the ceiling onto the dinner table were shockingly common. This was combined with a relentless war on filth. No matter how hard they worked, the homes were perpetually damp and dirty. Rain turned the floors to mud, and dry spells filled the air with dust from crumbling walls. The combination of damp earth, resident animals, and poor ventilation created a foul, musty odor that soaked into everything. For many women, this endless struggle against dirt was a source of deep despair. These conditions were a breeding ground for disease. The persistent dampness was an ideal environment for mold and mildew, leading to constant respiratory illnesses. The constant presence of rodents created a high risk for pest-borne diseases. The psychological toll was just as bad. The homes were small, dark, and claustrophobic, often located miles from the nearest neighbor. This profound isolation, combined with the oppressive physical environment and the unrelenting hardship, could lead to severe depression and a condition known at the time as prairie madness. The wooden escape. From the very beginning, no one ever saw a sod house as a permanent home. It was a temporary inconvenience, a grim necessity to survive the first brutal years of homesteading. The average soddy had a functional lifespan of only 6 or 7 years before decay made it unstable. The one thing that finally ended the sod house era was the railroad. As steel tracks pushed deeper into the plains, they brought something the settlers had always lacked: affordable milled lumber. As soon as a family could scrape together enough money, they abandoned their soddy for a proper frame house. This wasn't just an upgrade. The wooden house was a powerful symbol of success, of permanence, of civilization itself. It was an escape from the daily grinding war against dirt, dampness, and vermin. It meant having dry floors, clean air, and a roof that didn't threaten to kill you in your sleep. The sod house stands as a testament to the incredible resilience and desperate ingenuity of the American pioneer, but it has never achieved the romantic nostalgia of the log cabin for a simple reason. For the people who actually built and lived in them, they weren't symbols of rustic charm. They were symbols of a hellish reality they were all too grateful to leave behind. What part of living in a sod house do you think would have been the absolute worst? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.